And welcome back, footy fans, to another episode of Donnie's Disposals. I'm your host, Coach Donnie Hess, here, back with the last VFL Vantage of the season. I know this is a little delayed. Scheduling can be fun, especially when you have a man as busy as my co-host, Mr. Brendan Rhodes. Brendan, great to see you, sir.
Yeah, great to see you again, Donny. Yeah, it's been a while. I've been wallowing and hiding in a cave for a couple of months after what happened to our team a little while ago. But I thought I'd better stick my head up and have a bit of a yarn to you.
Well, I was trying not to go back and open up any PTSD moments for both of us when it comes to our beloved Swans. But you know what? We gotta talk to VFL. The men's final has come. It has gone. We have a premiere and a premiere I cannot wait to discuss. Let's jump right into it. Finals have come, finals have gone. And for the most part, they pretty much stayed to task. But I have to say, there were a few curveballs. I thoroughly enjoyed this VFL finals.
It was a brilliant final series, absolutely terrific. Like last year was the first time, 2023, that they tried the top 10 with the wildcard finals, and the higher ranked team won every final right through. This year, and everyone criticised it. Everyone
Mhm.
said, "Well, this is a waste of time because the teams that finished ninth and 10th got belted by seventh and eighth, and then seven and eight got belted by five and six, and in the end, the best two teams made the grand final and put on a cracker. But it was an extra week leading up to that. This year it was completely different right from the very first wildcard game, which turned out to be one of the games of the season, as we're about to talk about.
Hmm. Yep, definitely for sure. And it was definitely kept me on my seats for sure. So let's jump right into it. First round of finals, the play-in games. We will start. I'm gonna go with the other one first because I think the one everybody wants to talk about was the first one. We'll play the second one as we see the Williamstown Seagulls absolutely smash the Richmond Tigers 120 to 54. But the game everybody wanted to talk about was the upset. People's First Stadium up in Gold Coast. You would think the Suns get the win, but the Frankston Dolphins, yes, ladies and gentlemen, the Frankston Dolphins get a 3-point win, 103 to 100 in an absolute classic. And this sent shockwaves in the throughout the VFL fan base because nobody expected the Dolphins to go up to the Gold Coast and get a win, and they shock the world.
I had the Gold Coast winning this game by 7 or 8 goals, and I thought I was being generous to Frankston. It was absolutely unbelievable, and for anyone who's not a Sun supporter, brilliant and
Mhm.
amazing for football, amazing for all the standalone clubs, amazing for the game. Frankston in their first finals series since 2008, so 16 years. And mind you, if we didn't have the wild cards that everyone was so quick to pan, they would have finished ninth and missed out yet again.
Mhm.
But they were 10th, so they were 10th, so they wouldn't have even made it. And then they were 29 points down when Jed Walter kicked a goal for the Suns at the 3 minute mark of the last quarter. So just an amazing comeback. They kicked from that point on. They kicked 1-1-1, 2-1, 2-2, 3-2, 3-3, 4-3, 5 goals, three unanswered over the next 26 minutes. And when Tyson Milne, who is the son of the great Stephen Milne, the amazing forward pocket from St Kilda over the late 90s and 2000s, he does his best work playing in the back pocket as a rebounder, but he got up the ground, he got a loose ball on the wing and had a couple of bounces, bombed it home from 55 metres out with a couple of minutes to go. And well, I'll just say that there wasn't many people at the game simply because it's so hard to travel at short notice interstate for the Frankston supporters. And well, of course, most of the Suns fans follow the AFL team, but I reckon the players at People First Stadium would have heard the roar that emanated from the public viewing back at Kinetic Stadium in Frankston, about 2,000 kilometres away.
Hmm.
It was absolutely electric, and it was one of the games of the season, if not the game of the season, and yeah, to see the Frankston team celebrate, I don't think they could even believe it themselves, the Dollies, and it really sets them up for the future. Even though we're about to talk about what happened the following week, they've got something they can really build on. For the first time in many years, they're a destination club. They haven't lost anybody major that I'm aware of. They may have a couple drafted this week. Who knows? Um, but they are now have people who want to come and play for them rather than them having to beg them to come, because they are actually a winning team now.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's it's fantastic to see that again. Anytime you can see these standalone clubs kind of step out and not have and be able to be successful is fantastic. So with the two wins, we see the normal eight that many of the fans are used to as Frankston steps into a match with Southport and the Williamstown Seagulls matchup with the Box Hill Hawks in the first round. Let's jump to the results from that. And for the most part, it stayed on task, but a couple of swings. First of all, the Werribee Tigers get a win over Geelong, advancing to the preliminary finals 57-36, a 21-point win. Unfortunately, the week after all of the magic that Frankston, unfortunately, another Queensland squad takes them down as Southport smash the Frankston Dolphins in an absolute score fest 195-103, a 92-point win by the Sharkies there. Footscray knock off the Brisbane Lions to move on to the preliminary final 82-78 in an absolute classic. And Box Hill goes down as Williamstown continue to play on in the finals with a 28-point win, 80-52. I mean, if you look at the scores, I mean, the Footscray Brisbane Lions has to be by the scores, but how awesome is it that Williamstown knock off Box Hill?
How sensational it was. Once again, another standalone club going away and beating an aligned club in a final. Um, for many years, this is very interesting. Box Hill has had a habit of beating Williamstown at Williamstown, and the Seagulls have had a habit of beating the Hawks at the City Oval in Box Hill, and that's how it turned out again. They kicked 3 goals to nothing with the wind in the first quarter, and basically retained that margin for the rest of the day. They're an unbelievable outfit, Williamstown. They're just never beaten, and this definitely was a turn up. Box Hill are a team who fly under the radar every year. They finish in the top, or they didn't finish. They fell away a little bit late to drop out of the top four, but they're normally up around the top four and playing in preliminary finals when no one gives them any chance to, and winning premierships. I suppose a bit like Hawthorn, they're just winners. And for Williamstown to go over to the Box Hill City Oval in a big final and beat them was just an amazing performance. And Brody McLaughlin, 4 goals, proved once again that it was a unthinkable decision for the Gold Coast Suns to have let him go at the end of the previous season. Corey Ellison kicked 3 goals. Interestingly enough, he's going to be playing for Frankston next year, which adds into what I was saying, that the Dolphins can now attract players. Ellison lives over Frankston Way and was travelling to Williamstown, and now that Frankston isn't a struggler, they can get those blokes to play for them. But he's a star. He kicked nearly 40 goals for the year as well. They've lost a couple, Williamstown. They've recruited really well, but it was terrific to see them do that. Southport, that was, would you believe, the 195 points against Frankston. No disgrace at all for the Dolphins, because they still managed to kick 16 goals themselves. But Southport kicked 6 goals, 8-0 in the first quarter, 44-0 at quarter time. And you thought, well, this could be anything. And for Frankston to then kick 103 points after being 0 at quarter time was an amazing effort. They just couldn't stop Southport scoring. That was the Sharks' highest ever score in state league football, 195, the NEFL and the VFL. So that just tells you how electric they were. Um, Werribee and Geelong are both defensive teams, and Werribee's defence was a bit better than Geelong on that day. And the Footscray Brisbane Lions game, in my opinion, was the best game I called all season. Absolute classic from start to finish. Nothing between them. 3 goals to 2, 5 goals each, 9 goals to 7. Footscray came home with the win. The lead changed, I think, 7 times in the last quarter. And the Lions had a shot after the final siren to win. And it was on target going all the way. And then about 3 metres out, the wind got hold of it and dropped it like a pin.
Oh.
So that's how close it was. It was an absolute epic. And I was, after watching that, I was actually surprised that neither of those two teams made the grand finals. We're about to find out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So is I remember watching the highlights and I was just like, what a game of footy. I 100% with you. One of the best games of the season. Let's
Those
jump.
those are the games. Those are the games that are why we watch footy and why we commentate footy for games
Mhm.
like that.
Yep.
And that's what I said.
100%.
If you don't like football, if you don't like football or you don't understand football, all your American friends watching on here, if there is one game from the entire season that you want to go and watch the replay of, pick that one. Footscray, Brisbane Lions qualifying final, VFL.
Definitely, for sure. Definitely one I will probably go back and try to watch over the off season to get me through the cold winter months up here. So let's jump to the semifinal weekend. Neither game super competitive as the Southport Sharks go down to GMHBA Stadium and get an impressive road win, 87-58, a 29-point win. And the Brisbane Lions hold serve, ending the dream run of the Williamstown Seagulls 130 to 113, a 17-point win. I mean, if we look at it, I remember I pulled up my bracket from when we did our tips that I have to admit I pat myself on the back because after we got through the first 2 rounds, I go perfect when it comes to tipping. So I had to feel pretty happy with myself because getting Southport and Brisbane to the preliminary finals and thinking, hey, I've got all 4 there.
Only just though. Only just though. At the
Yep.
15-minute mark of the third quarter in that shootout between Brisbane Lions and Williamstown, Williamstown actually led that game by 24 points. Um, they kicked away. I think there was at halftime, Brisbane led by 4 points at halftime, and Williamstown came out after the main break and kicked. They kicked the first 4 goals. Kicked the first one, two. What they kick here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 goals to 1 they kicked in the first 15 minutes of the third quarter and turned that 4-point deficit into a 24-point lead. And wow, what's going on here? Because we just seen, as I just said, the Lions were extremely unlucky not to be in a preliminary final. They were about 2 meters away from it. And here they were at home, and they were going to go down to a Williamstown side who had already sprung one huge upset in beating the Box Hill Hawks on their home ground.
Mhm.
And then things just turned around, and from that point on, the Lions kicked. What was it? I think they kicked 10 goals to 2 after that point,
Mhm.
and turned the 24-point loss into a 17-point win, and just proved how good they really are. And for the second year in a row, Williamstown loses and goes out to Brisbane in Brisbane in a semi-final, which was heartbreaking for them in their 160th year of existence. But I think in the end, where they finished in 6th spot is about right, because the Lions were were clearly a top four side and deserved to be there, and they just had a little bit too much class across the whole 4 quarters. But yeah, that was a great game, and Southport. Well, I did the same thing, and I think remember the last time we spoke, I tipped them to do that, to go down to
Mhm.
Geelong and win, because with all due respect to the Cats fans, I didn't have the Cats as one of the major contenders, even though they had finished in the top four, and so it turned out, as they were convincingly beaten in the finals by the two sides that ended up going all the way.
Yep. So I think if I remember correctly, we both did pretty well after those first couple of the Williamstown and
After the
Frankston kind of
Frankston
screwed with
ones,
us a
yeah.
little bit.
Yeah, I might have given Williamstown a chance of beating Box Hill if I
You
remember
did. I
rightly,
think you
but
did.
it
Yep.
didn't tip them.
Yep.
But no, I certainly no one outside the Frankston Football Club would have given them um, yeah a snowflake's chance in hell of knocking off Gold Coast on the Gold Coast.
hmm Yeah, but what I loved, like I said, what I loved about it is how so many people were super happy about it too, and seeing
Oh yeah,
Frankston, and
everyone
and
loved it. If you weren't a
and
son, you loved it.
yeah, and you kind of, and like I said, you kind of knew most likely they wouldn't go much further than that. But the fact that they have a win in finals, and it brought some good energy to the football club. It was great. So
Yeah,
let's jump to
the only sad part about, sorry before you go, and the only sad
you're
part
good
about it was the passionate Frankston supporters that had waited 16 years to see their team play in the finals.
and
They
didn't get to
played
see
two finals, and both of them were in Queensland.
Queensland. Yep,
So they still didn't. Most of them still didn't get to see their team play in the final. So
at least not
hopefully
live.
not live, no, but hopefully they can be back again in 2025 and play a couple games in front of their fans in Melbourne.
That would be It would be fantastic both for the football club, but for the VFL too. 100% agree. Let's jump to the preliminary finals. We will see the two teams that get to the grand final. First off, we see the runners up from the season before in minor premiers, Werribee knock off the Lions by 20, 66-46, and their opponent would be the Southport Sharks as they go to Melbourne for the second consecutive week and get a win by 10, 61-51 over the Footscray Bulldogs. And an incredible, I like it that both games were relatively competitive. Again, Brisbane getting stifled by this great Werribee defense, and Footscray and Southport playing an absolute arm wrestle until the end.
Wet and windy day. This
Yep.
one was. Both games actually got hit by a major hailstorm, which is quite interesting. The Werribee Lions game was, I think it was during the last quarter. It was wet and windy all day, but the hailstorm came through in the last quarter and made it extremely tough. The Lions were actually 11 points in front at 3/4 time of that game, but Werribee, coming home with the wind, actually kicked 6 goals to 1 through the hail in the last quarter. So they showed that they can score, that they could score, and they could score heavily and quickly if they needed to. It was an amazing finish to a game that really at 3/4 time, with rain falling, hail on the way, they basically had no right to win from there. But just the heart and character of that side was fantastic. And as I said, it was the second year in a row that Brisbane had knocked Williamstown out in a semi-final. The second year in a row that Werribee knocked Brisbane out in a prelim. It's amazing how the fixture can fall in a 21 team competition, that the same matchup can happen 2 weeks in a row at the same stage 2 years in a row.
hmm
But that's what happened. It was just the quality of that Werribee team, the refusal to be beaten, that carried them over the line in that one. And yeah, I commentated the Footscray Southport game. And same thing, I think it was the third quarter, just after half time, that the hail arrived there. It's about another, I don't know, about 30 or 40 kilometres north of where Werribee is. So it took a while to get there. But yeah, it made conditions extremely difficult in that one. And the Sharks, well, they had the upper hand for the entire day. And once again, it was in the quarter where the hail struck that the cream rose to the top. and the Sharks kicked 5-1 in that third quarter to blow the game wide open. And in the end, it was Footscray kicked 3-0 in the last term, but the damage was done, and Southport were never really going to lose. So an amazing effort for the Sharks to come to Melbourne 2 weeks in a row and beat two top four teams to go through to their second grand final in 3 years.
Yeah, it was another fantastic game. Let's jump right to it. The grand final, the coup d'etat, and Icon Stadium in Melbourne sees the Werribee Tigers survive the scare of the Sharks and get a premiership for the first time in many years. Werribee Tigers 69, Southport Sharks 63. And the one thing for me on this is the Sharks have to be kicking themselves because 8-15-63, if they kick straight, they'd be premiers.
And it was early on that it happened. It was early on that it happened. The Sharks had complete control of the game in the first half that just couldn't put it on the scoreboard. They kicked the first three scoring shots were all behinds.
Mhm.
Werribee hit back with a couple of goals to take the lead, but yeah, the Sharks kicked 2-7 in the first term when they
Mhm.
had complete dominance of the game. They had, I think they had 2-2 in the second, so they were still 4-9 at half time. But they were absolutely dominant at that stage, and they were only 13 points in front.
Mhm.
And that was what Werribee coach Jimmy Allen said to his troops at half time. He gave them, from what was later said to be basically the biggest rocket of all time, if that makes any sense to the American audience. He basically tore the paint off the walls,
Mhm.
and then settled down and told them, yeah, you've played half a game, the worst half a game you've played all season, and you're only 13 points behind.
Mhm.
And they responded to that. They came out, they kicked 4-1 in the third quarter, got themselves a 7-point lead at the final change, and then just they kicked early goals in the last quarter, the first three of the last quarter. So that gave them a 25-point lead midway through the final term. Game's over, you would think.
Mhm.
But yeah, someone forgot to tell the Sharks, and they kicked 3-2 to a point from that stage on. And the last 5 or 6 minutes after Jacob Dawson kicked the goal at the 26-minute mark to bring the margin back to 6 points. The last 3 or 4 minutes of that game was some of the most frantic football you ever want to see, and with about 30 seconds to go, a hurried kick went down towards the goal square for Southport, and the cult figure Wiley Buzzer, the full forward, pack of about 20 players, flew straight over top of them, got both hands to the ball, but unfortunately for him and for the Sharks, he dropped it on the way down. So didn't quite, or he was a split second away from being paid the mark, but he didn't quite hang on to it long enough. If he had, he would have been kicking after the siren from 20 metres out straight in front.
Mhm.
And Southport would almost certainly have won the game from there. But that's or certainly would have got the draw and gone to extra time. Um,
Yeah.
so that's more 6 points was the final margin. So we
Yeah.
would have had extra time if he'd taken that mark, and that would have just added to the drama of what was a wonderful team, wonderful season, and a wonderful game. But yeah, full credit to Werribee. They refused to die. They hung on desperately in that last quarter, and they're only their second ever premiership and their first since 1993. So yeah, so congratulations to them. It was the first ever standalone grand final, both teams being standalone since the AFL reserves was merged into the competition at the end of 1999. So that was another major achievement too, to see two standalone teams make the grand final. They put on a classic for us, and congratulations to Werribee. They were the number one team all year, and they thoroughly deserved their flag. And commiserations to the Sharks for the second time in 3 years. They finished second and go back to the drawing board with a new coach next year with former Port Adelaide champion, premiership captain and coach Matt Primus taking over as the leader of the Sharks after Steve Daniels' retirement. And congratulations to Steve Daniel, one of the all time great coaches of state league football over the past 20 or 30 years. I can't say all time, but when I'd say over 20 or 30 years. But he's a great bloke, a great coach, and the Sharks were devastated not to send him out a winner. But they're not going anywhere in a hurry. The Sharks, they'll be back next year.
Yep. I think it'll be fun to watch. Like I said, the VFL is going to be quite interesting next year, seeing the strength of some of these standalone clubs going up against some of the AFL clubs. It's going to be fantastic. Well, Brendan, that is it. That is the VFL season over with. That is all of the games of footy done. So I thought before we get done with the episode, instead of just cutting it off right there, let's review a little bit. Let's go back and talk a little bit about the VFLW and the VFL seasons. Enjoy some memories, just the tiniest bit. So I want to go back to the women's. I know it's been a while since their grand final, but let's go back just the littlest bit. Now, on our script, I have game of the year at the start, but I want to do that last. I like talking about the game of the year last, and especially we were talking about this pre-mic. Is for me, I've got a huge caveat on mine. So let's go to this. We'll start with the negative. Let's get it out of the way. For the VFLW, what do you think was your biggest disappointment? Whether it's a team or it's a player, what was your biggest disappointment in the VFLW this year?
It's a tough call. Like it's been it's been 4 months since the grand final, so I had to try and remember back to come up with something. I think if you're looking at a team, it's probably the low hanging fruit is probably Geelong, who went from the finals last year to finishing last in season 2024 with 3 wins, and they were horrible late in the year. They failed to kick a goal, I think, on 3 occasions for the season. They just couldn't get going. I think they turned the second half of the year really into a development sort of competition. They played many young players out of the junior comp and gave them development minutes, and which will be great for them for the future, but certainly meant they struggled to be competitive. But at the end of the day, like they wins, but the eventual premiers, North Melbourne, only lost. One of the very few games that North Melbourne lost was actually to Geelong early on in the season. So that was quite interesting. But I'll put Geelong down, and probably the team that finished second last in the Southern Saints as the disappointment, because I think they were 2 teams that I had in the top 6 at the start of the year, and they finished second last and last. Very, very even competition. So you don't need much to go wrong for that to happen. But and incidentally, for those who do follow the VFLW, that will be a new look next year. The Southern Saints are no more. They for the last 3 years, they've been administered by the Sandringham Zebras Football Club, and as of next year, that is what they will be known as. They're going to change to the yellow, black, and blue, and they will be known as the Sandringham Zebras in the women's competition from next year, which I think is absolutely fantastic and something I'm a massive fan of, as opposed to a generic name like the Southern Saints. Everyone knows who they are and what they stand and what they'll stand for now as Sandringham. So I think that's great to see, and I think that'll spark them as well.
Yep, I'm 100% with. Go ahead.
Yes,
Sorry.
they're probably the disappointments, I think, of the year, but it's very hard to differentiate in such a competition.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing as I was diving through it, and those were the 2 names that I was like, if I had to say disappointment, like I said, Geelong and the Saints were both there last year, and this year we're towards the bottom of the ladder. Now, it also helps when.
Interestingly enough, Carlton, who finished 9th, were also in the finals last year. So that
Mhm.
that tells you how quickly things can change in that competition.
Well, and it also didn't help too that you with Sydney and GWS kind of having their like
Yeah.
exhibition section of the season with 5 games apiece also kind of makes the latter look kind of interesting too if you add them. Like I know the AFL website has them in on this, and I know that with some of them with
Yes.
some of the ways that I think with the VFL they don't have them in since they weren't eligible
We
for
don't even
finals.
we took them out of the app because they weren't eligible to compete for the premiership. But
Yep.
I believe they should have been in the ladder. But that was the way they decided to go.
Mm.
I hope, and remember, I'm a Swans supporter saying this, but I hope that they don't do the same thing next year.
I agree.
I think you cannot have guest teams. I don't like it. Put them in, play them, give them the whole 14 games, give them a chance to play finals if good enough. What
Mhm.
will happen is they will develop a VFLW list, the same as the other teams. They won't. You won't see them like the 5 games that they played. 9 out of the 10, they absolutely dominated and destroyed their opponents. Sorry, 8 out of 10 because GWS had some trouble with Carlton in their first game, but still won. Um, but they played their full strength teams in most of those games
Mhm.
because they only had the 5 games to play. If they've got the 14 games to play or 16 or however many they play, they're going to spread their stars out more like the other teams did. They're not going to be as dominant, as destructive as they were in those 5 games. They're going to teach more young girls how to play football at the level, young ladies to play football at the level, and they're going to provide more competitive football for the other teams. So get them in, make them full members, or don't have them there at all.
Yep, 100% with you on that one. It's the same thing. Just as the Swans fan, I hope that they do, just because I think it'd be great for the competition to have a couple more teams. But
Yeah,
if you can't get them the full slate of games, don't, because
yeah.
it really kind of, I thought it kind of threw off a few teams. Like there were some, like, just percentage wise, there were some teams that took hits because they had took big losses in those games against either GWS or Sydney, and it could have cost them a final spot. So
North,
I
North Melbourne,
yep.
North Melbourne ended up winning the premiership. They finished fourth on the ladder, and they had a percentage of 93.75,
Mhm.
which means that overall they let me bring up even after the finals, even after their percentage after the finals went up to 110, but during the home and away season, I think that means that roughly across their 14 games, they conceded about 100 points more than they scored. And that was because they, in their one game, which was against Sydney, they got beaten by 15 goals.
Mhm.
And because
Yep.
they were playing a full strength AFLW team, and we're about to talk about the one of the games of the year which happened against the Swans. Um, but that game of the year was the only one out of the 10 where the full member team actually
One.
took seriously and played their full team. Like
Yep.
North Melbourne left all their AFLW players out and wondered why they got smashed, and
Mhm.
that's what 9 of the 10 teams did.
Yep. Yep, I remember that week. I remember that week. So, but before we get to the game of the week, we'll do the opposite. We'll do some positivity here. And your biggest surprise, I'd like to go first because I wouldn't be surprised if we have the same one, and that's Darabin. Because if you look at the last couple of seasons, they have just struggled so mightily. And for them to win games. 5 wins this year, 5-9, crawling up the ladder, not finishing bottom. It was so fantastic. It is great for the competition to see this once mighty club getting a little bit of a foothold, a little bit more in the VFLW. Again, are they going to be up there winning premierships anytime soon? Probably not. But how awesome was it to see the Darabin family just surround this team as they started to win games? And it was so much fun to watch this Falcons side as the year progressed. Early in the year, a little iffy, but they just seemed to keep progressing. And it was so fantastic. 5 wins, jumping all the way up to 11th. Fantastic for the Darabin Football Club.
Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I can't call them the biggest surprise packet of the year because at the start of the season, I actually named them as the big improver. So I can't call them the surprise packet, but it took them half a year to gel with their new look team. They recruited a whole heap of stars from other clubs, and they went 0-7 as it took them a lot of time to gel. But they're and I think we touched on it the last time we spoke, or maybe the time before, how 2022 they went from 5-2 to lose 28 games in a row, and then went 5-2.
Mhm.
So so the biggest feel good of the year was Darabin winning that game in round 8,
Mhm.
and I think if I can get that to come up, it was against Carlton,
Mhm.
beating Carlton by 25 points at Preston in round 8 to break a 28 match losing streak. That is clearly the feel good story of the season, and certainly the one that made the most people sit up and take notice and think, hey, how good is this? How absolutely marvelous is this? The Darabin, the Bastion, when anyone talks about women's footy, the first name that comes to mind is Darabin Falcons. They are women's footy, and they're the last of the original old teams from the old VWFL, from the first year of the VFLW, uh, as recently as 2016, that are still running around. They're fighting against the tide, trying to compete against all these AFLW reserves teams, but they just keep at it and keep refusing to die, and they're going to keep fighting on for as long as they can. That to see them come back and win those 5 games, hopefully they will retain their entire list and add a few more and be able to potentially make the next step and sneak into a final. But yeah, so they're the feel good story. But if you're looking for the surprise packet, I suppose, of the year, and you can talk more about these girls. For me, I'm going for a mixture of the Western Bulldogs and Collingwood. Um, for the Western Bulldogs, they finished second last. They finished last in 2022, second last in 2023. Um, I had them potentially improving in 2024 and still finishing last, because that's how much I had everyone else improving as well. And they made a grand final. So they made me look stupid. Um, the fact that I picked North Melbourne pre-season to win the premiership sort of cancels
Balances
that
it
out a
out.
little bit,
It
but
balances it out.
it balances it out a little bit. But Western Bulldogs certainly gave me what for. So that was brilliant. And Collingwood, you'd think, well, Collingwood made the 2023 grand final and they finished seventh and missed the finals altogether. So how can you call that a positive surprise packet? Well, as we touched on earlier on in the year, Collingwood lost their entire list except for one player. That's a list of I think 34 players. 33 of them departed the club. So they basically had to start from complete scratch. And for them to go and win 6 games out of 14 and only miss the finals by half a game was, I thought, just an absolutely amazing effort. And they can be extremely proud of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely for sure, and it's fantastic. Like I said, it stinks that that happened, but to be able to get that list together and at least be competitive during the season was fantastic. So let's jump to it. Game of the year for the VFLW. I want to go second on this because I have a huge caveat. This is the one thing about being the host of this podcast that I will definitely do this unless you want, sir. I can kind of take over this section because for me this will be fun. But did you have a game of the year for the VFLW that you would think I have to go back and watch this during the off season?
I'm not going to steal it off you. I'm not going to steal the one you're thinking about off you. Um, I'm just having a quick scan back through them. There were some absolutely
There were some
amazing
classics.
games of football
Oh yeah.
throughout the course of the year. Like there were 3 or 4 draws for the year.
Yep.
There was some amazing performances, as I said. Darabin breaking through and winning 5 games in the second half of the year, and only losing to North Melbourne by a kick
Mhm.
at one stage there. You're going to talk about round 7 that had basically a whole round of unbelievable results.
Mhm.
Um, but for me, the one that really sticks in the mind, even 4 months later, is quite clearly the grand final. It's hard to go past it when you think what actually happened in that game. With North Melbourne came and just flew out of the blocks. They kicked 4 goals, 2 in about the first 12 minutes before the Western Bulldogs even went past the centre circle. And we're thinking, geez, what's going on here? This is going to be an absolute blowout, a destroyed grand final, probably worse than the 2022 one where Essendon kept the Southern Saints goalless for the entire day. Yeah, and it's just going to be a real anticlimax to finish the season. But then the Bulldogs just started to work their way back into the game, and it was 2 goals each in the second quarter, so it was still 24 points the margin at half time. And out of nowhere, the Bullies absolutely exploded with some of the most electric footy that you've ever seen in women's footy in the third quarter. They kicked 4 goals, 2 to 2 points, and all of a sudden, at 3-quarter time, the scores are level. And what was going to be one of the biggest anticlimaxes ever was shaping as an all-time classic. The Bulldogs had all the momentum, and then North Melbourne just said no. And they responded, and they kicked 4 goals to 1 of their own in the last quarter and ended up winning convincingly by 20 points. In women's football, you just don't see seesawing momentum like that. It just it just does not happen on a regular basis. You can see it in the men's a lot, but in women's footy, it just doesn't happen. And to see it happen in a grand final where a team got such an amazing start, they got run down, and then they responded and went away again. That will go down in the annals of history at the North Melbourne Football Club as one of the great premiership wins. And Nike Dijuk, the full forward, kicking 4 goals to win the Lisa Hardiman medal for best on ground. She's an absolute star, and I remain absolutely dumbfounded that she wasn't picked up as a as an injury replacement or anything like that since the end of the season. And I'll be even more falling off my chair if she doesn't get drafted next month for the following season, because she could be absolutely anything. If you're watching Scotty Gowan Sydney coach, go and get her, please,
Mhm.
because she's a gun. Get her in. But yeah, congratulations to North Melbourne. First ever premiership for them in women's football. First premiership of any kind since 1999. But that for me was a game for the ages, even at a
Definitely.
20-point margin.
Definitely. Like I said, some people say, look at the score as a 20-point margin, but the back and forth nature of that game a little bit again. North, for the most part, really never trailed in that game, but the Doggies showed that fight in that third quarter. And there was, you could definitely tell there were some North fans that were a little tight on the backside because they were like, oh gosh, could this happen? But this is where being the host of this show is a little bit fun because I know I put game of the year, but I gotta say it, sir. As we kind of said, I gotta go to round seven because it was round of the year. Because I remember when we discussed this during the show. I mean, if you take away the GWS versus Essendon and the Western Bulldogs versus Hawthorne Hawks, if you take those two games away, both of those were over 25 points. The rest of
And
the
and the
round
Bulldogs Hawthorn game, the Bulldogs Box Hill game was one of the upsets of the season. The
Mhm.
Hawks were, I
At
think,
the time, yeah.
yeah, on top of the ladder at the time, and that was that turned heads more than any of these, almost more than any of these thrillers you're about to talk about.
Yeah, but it's like, I mean, I literally, as you start with it, if you add the Borough, if you add the Port versus Darebin Falcons, 8 points. Sydney versus Collingwood, 2 points. Carlton versus Geelong, 3 points. North Melbourne versus Southern Saints, 1 point. And the Williamstown Casey game plays to a draw. I mean, I couldn't separate these games because they were all just absolute classics. Like round seven was, I can't say game of the year. I have to say round of the year because it was just too incredible. I mean, Casey Williamstown is part of like three draws during the season. North and the Southern Saints back and forth game ends with the Rouge just edging out the Saints by one. The Icon Park sees Carleton edge out the Geelong Cats. And then what I think many people will talk about is one of the shockers of the year. And I know, as you said, Hawthorne was knocked off. I mean, Box Hill was knocked off during this round, but Sydney falling at home to Collingwood by two. And as you said, Collingwood took it seriously. Several of their AFLW stars got called in, including Ruby Slicer, Stacey Livingston, and several others. And Sydney kind of did the opposite. They took a few of their more high caliber players off the park at the time, and the Pies found a way to get it done at up in Tramway Oval up in Sydney by 2 points. I remember watching this game up until about three-quarter time, and I turned it off to watch the men's game and was like, well, this one should win it. And turning back and watching the fourth quarter later, going, what the heck happened? So it was the shocker that some people say, how could you pick a game of the year that is against your team? Because it was just such a shock. Because I mean, if you look at the ladder, I mean, Sydney and GWS, both of their percentages were ridiculous because they were playing their AFLW stars. Most of the VFL teams were only sprinkling them in. So to see the Swans fall in the only game of the two between GWS and Sydney that was lost was incredible for the competition. And again, as you said, Collingwood had to revamp its list for the VFL side. So incredible, but I could not separate this round. 8 points, 2 points, 3 points, 1 point draw. All of the first five games of the round was definitely, I could not separate it. So now that
Sydney's four wins leading into that game were 62 points, 89 points against the eventual premiers North Melbourne, 85 points against Geelong. The 62 was against the grand finalists Western Bulldogs, mind you.
Mhm,
Um, and then 63 points against Box Hill Hawks, who were undefeated at the time.
mhm,
And they were up against a Collingwood team who hadn't been going that well. As I said, they were a new look team. Yes, they brought their AFLW list in, but at the 18-minute mark of the last quarter, 2 minutes to go, Sydney led by 10 points.
mhm,
So they were still going to win. They were still going to get out of it and win, no problems whatsoever. And Sarah Sansonetti scrambles a goal at 18:32, and all of a sudden it's 4 points of difference. What's going on here? Collingwood's been outplayed for most of the game, but they're still in contention. What's going on? Surely they can't.
mhm,
And somehow the Swans allowed a Collingwood midfielder out the front of the pack, out the front of the next ruck contest. They scrambled it forward. They scrambled it all the way down to the goal square. And in the space of about 8 seconds from the ball up, Caitlin Day has kicked a goal from the goal square, and Collingwood has absolutely stolen it. And yeah, they up until the last 2 minutes, 90 seconds, they had no right to steal it, but they stole it because they kept themselves in the game and they gave themselves a chance. And maybe the Swans relaxed just when they shouldn't have. But that was, yeah, if you're looking for the upset of the season, um, if you're going past the seesawing nature of the grand final, then that is definitely the game of the rest of the year. No question at all about
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
So really good choice. Really good choice, that one.
Yeah, I remember going back and watching that one, and like I said, as gutting as it was, and especially considering if you look at the AFLW season, that the Swans had the same affliction of losing games,
Lost a lot of
of
close
losing,
games.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, of dropping games late. It was kind of an infliction on the Swans this year, but absolute classic again, as you said. The Pies just did not. They took every second they possibly could, but got it done.
They refused to
So,
lose.
yep,
They refused to
exactly.
lose,
So.
and that will serve the. And their AFLW team ended up finishing last, but the VFLW girls, the half a dozen or eight of them that got to play in that particular game, will take so much out of that for next year's VFLW season. Even though it was halfway through the year, Collingwood played so much better in the second half of the season after that. Um, the confidence that it gave them that if they played to their system and never gave up, they could win games of footy, and they did win games of footy, and they'll be much better for that going forward.
Mhm. Definitely, for sure. So let's have some fun a little bit. Let's pull out the magic crystal ball for next year. And I want you to do this for you, sir, in the VFLW. What's a team that you're looking forward to watching next season?
It's at this stage of the year. There's not a lot of publicity going around about the teams, who's coming and who's going, and all that sort of stuff. But the one team that has been extremely active and posting a lot of their new signings, and suggesting to me that they're going to be extremely hard to beat with the players they've got coming in, and I haven't heard about players they're leaving, and that's the minor premiers. That's Williamstown.
Mhm.
Keep a very, very close eye. This is very, very early, of course, to be making any sort of calls, but based on what I've seen, on the socials for signings and all that sort of stuff, Williamstown is tracking nicely. They finished on top of the ladder this year. They ended up going out in a preliminary final to a rampant Bulldogs outfit after losing their best two players. Um, they lost their star fullback Gabby Beatingweg Webster, got picked up by Fremantle the week before the finals, and then their captain Eliza Strafford did a knee in the qualifying final, and they just couldn't handle that. But yeah, I think right at this point in time, they are really looking like a team to watch.
And for me, maybe it's a little bit of the heartstrings, but I cannot wait to watch Darabin next year. I really crossing my fingers that they can add
Can
to
they
this
back it up?
momentum.
Can they back
Can,
it up and
can,
keep
can
going?
they back it
Definitely.
up? Can they maybe even push to be in that close to the final spot? Maybe not even make finals, but at least make things interesting at the end of the year when it comes to Darabin that you're definitely keeping an eye on. So they're my team to watch. Like I said, I have no idea. Hopefully they don't come crashing back to reality a little bit. I really, really hope not. I can hope that they can maintain that. As you said, we're not going to know the majority of their ins and outs for months from recording, but I'm hoping, crossing my fingers that Darabin can keep the good story going of their end of the year
Agreed.
ending 5-2 last year. So let's jump over. We'll go to a little bit closer to what we've been talking about, and that is the men's season. And we will start off with the JJ Liston Trophy. I want to talk about the best and fairest for the VFLW, and Werribee gets another medal as Dom Brew hoists the JJ Liston Trophy.
A brouhaha. or even as the headline showed the day after, it was called a domination,
Hmm.
which it was, and it was in both because Dom Brew won the JJ Liston Trophy, and the Western Bulldogs captain Dom Carboni won the Lambert Pierce Medal for the women,
I
and
did get a chuckle at
so it was
that.
amazing. Dom Brew, as recently as 2022, was a Dower tagger, a tackling machine. For those who follow football, that's a guy who might not be 100% sure of the terminology, I should say. That is a guy whose sole job is to stop his opponent getting the ball, and it doesn't matter if he doesn't get it himself at all. That's as recently as 2022, and he started to turn it around last year. And this year, he turned himself into the best player in the competition, and by a long, long way. He actually had the medal won outright with two full rounds still to play. So much so that the vote counters took the unprecedented step of actually cancelling the count and not bothering to read the votes for the last two games because he was that far in front. I said on our last podcast what I thought about that. We don't need to go there again. Um, but that just tells you how good he was, and he filled in as captain in the second. He'd been captain in previous years, but with the captain Nick Coughlin being out of the game with an Achilles injury for the second half of the season, and now having actually retired, Brew just stood up and he averaged 28 touches a game, which was, I think, 5 more than his previous best. He dropped to, I think, about 9.5 tackles a game, and you think he dropped. Yeah, right. That still ranked him the fourth best tackler in the league after he was number one the previous 3 years. So even though he was getting the ball more than all but about 6 other players in the competition, he was still tackling the opposition more than about 3 other players in the competition. So that tells you how good he was. And he's 27. He's 27, so it's getting towards the back end of him potentially getting an opportunity on an AFL list. He thoroughly deserves it. Really hope he does. It won't happen. It won't happen on the first night of the draft on Wednesday night. It could happen on Thursday in the second part of the draft. If it is going to happen, it's probably more likely to be in the rookie draft on Friday morning, or potentially with a train on to be a supplementary selection period, later on in the preseason. But I really hope someone takes a chance on the guy, because even though he hasn't been in the AFL system, the leadership and the dedication and the determination that he will bring to the competition to any AFL club would be out of this world. And he actually took a very, very rare step over the past couple of weeks, and he sent a letter. He actually sent an email letter to the recruiting managers and the coaches, definitely the recruiting managers, and I think a couple of the coaches of every AFL club, basically just begging them for a chance. Give me a crack. I will not let you down. And I don't think anyone who's watched him play thinks that there is any chance that he would let them down. So hopefully he gets a crack. But if not, he has last week recommitted to Werribee, so he'll be back there doing what he does. If he doesn't get picked up, he'll be there in the number 29 Guernsey again, terrorising opposition midfields at VFL level.
As great as it would be for the VFL to keep him, I really, really hope he gets his shot. A lot like Sean Manna did with Geelong.
Yeah,
You really, really hope so, because I mean he's making Geelong look incredibly intelligent for picking him up there. So I'm going to
they
be
could
fascinated.
get 3 players drafted this week.
Yep,
Werribee.
yep.
Jack Henderson, the Norm Goss medalist for best on ground in the grand final, is is being very, very closely looked at. And Riley Bice, the young 20, I think about 23-year-old intercepting halfback who played his first season in the VFL and just got better and better as the season went on and ended up being a real star by the end of the year. Those three could all go, and while that would seriously hamper Werriby's premiership defence, it would be no less than all of them deserve, and the Tigers would be the first mob to drive them to the airport or to training at whichever club they end up at, because they all deserve a crack at it.
Definitely. For sure. Let's jump to it. Like I said, let's get the negative out of the way. For the VFL, what was your biggest disappointment, team or player, or biggest disappointment for the VFL this year?
Collingwood and Carlton. Um, that's a simple one for me. You could say Casey Demons; they were very disappointing as well. Um, these teams, Casey and Collingwood, made the second week of the finals last year, the elimination finals, and they won 9 games between them. 5 for Casey, 4 for Collingwood. Never got going. Collingwood lost 10 or 11 games in a row at one stage, and were extremely disappointing. Um, to see their teams drop off so badly when the senior teams were still going all right was the biggest surprise of the year. I certainly expected them to do quite a bit better than that. And Carlton, well, they had that major collapse in the final round of the 2023 season when they only needed to get within about 80 points of Gold Coast in the last game to make the finals, and they got beat by 120. So to miss out, but yeah, they won 4 games as well for the year, and that was extremely disappointing for Carlton fans there too. So those three for me, I think, were the dropping off so significantly. I had Casey listed as the team to drop off at the start of the year, but I don't think I even expected them to drop off by as much as they did.
Yeah, and I'm 100% with you. I thought the same thing as both Collingwood and Carlton were two of my disappointments this year. Now I can kind of understand Collingwood a little bit because their AFL roster this year just could not stay healthy. I mean, they were being held together with any adhesive product they could
And
possibly
Carlton had
find.
a lot of injuries too, so you're right.
Yeah. Yeah, so I can kind of see that. So I'm more of they were disappointing because of their results, but if you really look at the way their season kind of went out, you can it kind of makes sense with why they finished where they did. Casey almost a little bit too is the same thing, is that their AFL squad just was devastated with injuries and in time periods that really hurt them. So I'm with you. Like the same three names popped into my head, but and then I kind of thought about it in my covering of the AFL that I can kind of see
There were
why,
reasons.
because yep, there were reasons why they were as disappointing as they were. So let's jump to the opposite, and that is biggest surprise. What was your biggest surprise for the VFL? Because for me, I gotta say it, and again, maybe it's a little bit of that great news story. It's Coburg. I mean, how do you not go with Coburg? I mean, 5 wins this season. Again, a team that was towards the bottom of the ladder last year. They get some wins, and they kind of became that second favorite in the VFL because you love seeing the teams that have perennially been towards the bottom getting wins and moving up the ladder.
That was one of my favourite games of the year, seeing Coburg break a 23 match losing streak when they beat Collingwood in round 4. Was brilliant. So great to see, and it was the first win as a VFL coach for Jamie Cassidy McNamara. He had to wait into his second season to do it. So I think it was his 20th or 21st game as a coach. So that was just so great to see. They went on to beat the Casey Demons. Their win over Port Melbourne when they came from 5 goals down in the last quarter to win by 5 points was the best win that they had for the year. And the battle, they won 2 battles of Bell Street against the Northern Bull Ants, which is one of the biggest rivalries in the competition. and it's the first time that they've beaten the Bull Ants since 2015. Strangely enough, given that they've both been down the bottom of the ladder for so long, the Northern Blues, as they were before 2021, now the Northern Bull Ants had the wood over them. So for them to win those two games, a little bit fortunate with the second one, but for them to win those two games is a massive step forward, and they've been recruiting quite strongly since the end of the season, which suggests that they could go further up. But for me, the surprise packets, the feel good stories of the year are Frankston, of course,
Hmm.
who I actually had finishing in the bottom four, and for them to end up making a final, winning a final, and coming eighth. 11 wins and 9 losses for the year. I think that's the big story of the season for me. And the other one is Richmond. You know, we're giving Collingwood, Carlton, and Casey excuses and outs
Hmm.
for for injuries and that sort of stuff. Richmond had half their team out for the majority of the year. They had eight ACLs, 8 ACL knee injuries across
Hmm.
their seniors and reserves lists, and they still won 10 games and qualified for the finals in ninth spot. They've ended up finishing 10th after getting that flogging off Williamstown first up. But for Richmond to do what they did under Steve Morris, and Morris has earned himself a coaching promotion higher up the Richmond food chain for next year because of it. Um, those two teams, Richmond and Frankston, for me, were the real stories of the year. You could throw Southport in there as well, coming back from 14th to make the grand final, but 14th, they weren't a 14th place team. They had their injury issues and things go wrong in 2023. So it didn't surprise me to see them bounce back as much. But yeah, the Dolphins and the Tigers were the feel good stories of the year for me, along with Werribee breaking a 31-year premiership drought.
Definitely, for sure. That was the other one. It was like fighting between what do you choose? You pick Frankston, who makes the finals, or Coburg, who, like I said, the long losing streak and to get it. So you couldn't go wrong either way. But it was fun to see these standalone clubs have some success. Again, I'm crossing my fingers that maybe the bullies start to finally figure it out a little bit, and we get a more competitive league. It's not just, well, the haves and the have-nots for so much of it. So we'll jump to it.
Well, even the Bull Ants. Sorry, Donny. Even the
No, you're
Bull
good.
Ants were a lot more competitive this year. Even though they dropped from second last to last on the ladder and didn't win any more games. 2 games last year, 2 games this year. A real measure that we use to judge improvement is the percentage,
Hmm.
which is obviously the differential for most competition, points for divided by points against. And this year's percentage was 62.8, which is still weak. It's still the lowest in the competition, but last year's was, I think, around about 44. So, in other words, for every 100 points they conceded, this year they scored 20 points more than they did last year. So that is, even though they finished the same result, 2-16, and they dropped one spot further down the ladder, finished 2 games clear on the bottom, they showed significant improvement from 2023. And they have been recruiting very nicely as well since the off season. So it certainly isn't a stretch to think they could potentially find their way a little bit further up the ladder.
Definitely for sure on that one. So let's jump to it. Game of the year. This is always the fun one for you, sir. Game of the year in the VFL.
We've already touched on this one. For me, it was Footscray versus Brisbane Lions in the qualifying final. That was the one I got to call. The one I got to watch is Frankston and Gold Coast in the wildcard game. So yeah, both finals for me, but there were just so many amazing games throughout the course of the year that you could take on, and like you could pick 25 of them and you wouldn't be wrong.
Mhm.
But for me, the best game I called, not just this year, but for a number of years, probably since the 2019 grand final, was that Footscray Brisbane Lions game, and the Sydney North Melbourne game at Arden Street when Luke Parker kicked an 80-metre goal with a minute to go to win the game. That's another one that's potentially on the list there. But Frankston's improbable comeback against Gold Coast and the actual game of the year for seesawing from start to finish for me was Footscray Brisbane Lions in the qualifying final.
Yeah, as you said, there's so many that you can pick. It's hard not to argue when you get a classic, when you get a goal or less in a grand final. So I got to go Werribee versus Southport, especially considering you saw the moxie of Werribee to be able to kind of handle absolutely
Yeah.
just coming out flat and having Southport jump all over them. And again, Southport didn't capitalize on it, but to see Werribee's championship medal and for them to pull out that win, and again, and then for Southport to kind of do the same thing in the fourth quarter and go, nope, 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 you're not doing this to us. We're not just going to roll over. And it was incredible. It's a great way to end the season. I agree with you. I think the Doggies Brisbane match was absolutely electric. The Gold Coast Frankston game I thought was fantastic, not only because both teams scored over 100 points, but Frankston throwing the wrench in everybody's thought processes of knocking off the Gold Coast at the Gold Coast. So many to choose from. But I will pick Werribee Southport in the grand final for me. But again,
And you definitely wouldn't be wrong.
there's there's not a bad choice. There is not a bad choice at all. So again, kind of like with the women, I know this is jumping the shark just the tiniest bit, but is there a team to watch or a team that you can't wait to keep an eye on next season?
This time last year, I said Port Melbourne, and I'm going to say the same. I'm going to say Port Melbourne again. I think they were actually quite disappointing this year. I did consider putting them in the disappointing category in their 150th year after they recruited so strongly, but a lot of their recruits that they had this year just couldn't get on the park and play a lot of games. And with uh, with former with former AFL Western Bulldogs coach Brendan McCartney coming on as senior coach next year. Great James Hurd from Essendon, former Essendon coach and legend of that club, coming in as the director of coaching. They've got the high profile clout that they had for 12 years under Gary Ayres. They have not taken having 3 or 4 disappointing seasons lightly at all. They are absolutely desperate. They're hungry. They have lost a couple of important players. Don't get me wrong. Billy Gow is the Frosty Miller medalist. You might actually see more of him over there. He's actually given footy away to have a crack at punting. So we'll see how he goes, and certainly wish him the best of luck in that endeavour. If not, I'm sure Port Melbourne will take him back with open arms. There's no question about that. But yeah, I can see the Borough under this new coaching regime, with all respect to Adam Scrobelack, who was going through a lot of stuff off the field, as well as the issues that he was having on it to try and sort things out. Yeah, I think there's a new aura, there's a new feel around the Port Melbourne Football Club right at this point in time.
Yeah, definitely for sure on that one. And that is it, sir. That is the VFL and VFLW seasons talked about, covered. It has been a long year. We got started early. We got started early. It's been so much fun. And as per usual, Brendan, incredible job. It is so much fun sitting down and chatting with you. Not only do we talk VFL, but we talk Sydney Swans, and we have just a blast. It is incredibly so much fun to work with you, sir, for this season. Thank you so much for your wonderful work this year on the podcast.
It's been absolutely fantastic, mate. And once again, as I've said on regular occasions, thank you so much for taking an interest in footy, not just the VFL, the SANFL, the WAFL, the AFL, the AFLW, all the stuff you do is absolutely amazing to take our great game to America and the rest of the world. and I really hope that everyone over there in the USAFL appreciates what you do, and you continue to help growing the competition over there, so that one day soon, maybe not soon, maybe not in our lifetimes, but we can potentially take this game even more to the world, and see if we can, and really, well, not so much take over, but certainly grab a foothold outside Australia that we've never been able to do in the past, and that's the work that people like you will leave a massive legacy for that if you can. So thank you very much for your efforts in that as well.
No, I appreciate it, and it's so much fun. It's so much fun to hear that. And like I said, as we've discussed a little bit even off mic, is that the crazy hours that I have to do for this podcast sometimes is people would say, "Why do you do it?" I said, "It's just I love this. I love this sport. The sport has just been so much fun." And there's so many great people that I've been connected with it, and it definitely has become almost an honor to do what I do, and to have met some of the people that I have. It's been so much fun. So that is going to do it for our VFL coverage this year and for this particular podcast. Keep an eye out as this podcast comes out. We are closer and closer to the draft. I have my draft expert all set up and ready to go. We will talk the free agency period and draft for the men's. We will cover the finals for the women's. I have a couple of great co-hosts for me to help review after the grand final as we crown a premiership in the AFLW. And then, of course, the women's free agency and draft coverage as well before the start of the year. And keep an eye out. I am setting up my off-season supporter series. I've got some fun set up for that. This year, I will, you know what? I'll do it. I will announce it. This year, I am doing another Americans supporter series and international as well. I've got a friend in Scotland who is a huge footy fan I want to talk with. So I will be doing another international off-season supporter series talking about their love of not only the sport but their club as well. So keep an eye on it. That will be during the off season when the footy is gone, but I will definitely be keeping an eye on the cricket as well. So that'll do it for another episode of Donnie's Disposals. Keep an eye out, more footy coverage right here very, very soon.